Good morning, everybody. It's Dr. Antonio from Still Point Ayurveda in Philadelphia. Again with Monday Live Talk. And today's topic is going to be let's talk about consistency, health, and success. And last week we talked about how when you have good health, that's already inherently considered good success, because with good health, you are successful and are able to really engage in life in a more fuller way when you have, you know, optimal health, essentially. And so we talked about last week how it's important to put certain things in place. One of the things that's important to put in place, which is today's topic towards health and success, is consistency. There's that societal, statement that is, we are creatures of habit, right? And so sometimes these sayings in society, we have to really stop and think about, like, where did this come from? What is this really about? How does it pertain to the reality? How is it rooted in our society in many different ways? And so being creatures of habit. So before the onset of electricity, there was more, good morning, there was more of an understanding that we were following the daily patterns, the circadian rhythm that's inherently built into the design of our genetics is aligned with the positioning of the earth and how it's just doing its thing, right? And so the sun rises, the sun sets, and it affects different parts of the planet at different times of year. Some places have seasons, some places do not have seasons, just depends on where you're located. And that's important because where you're located is what you're going to have as an influence upon your own wellness, your well-being. And so before the onset of electricity, we were rising with the sun generally and setting with the sun generally. Nature is in a lot of ways very consistent. When you take some time to really sit within the seasons, sit with the seasons, observe the seasons, and think about how your relationship to the seasons are important and how that, affects you, you'll start to have a more integrated approach to your own well-being. And, really, Ayurveda says that health and wellness are really at the tips of your fingertips and at the forefront of your mind when you think about it. And that's what's important, because it's important to think of yourself first. So in this way, being selfish in a good way is important because you're taking yourself into account. You are the center of your universe in your life. And in order to sustain what your world consists of, it's important to have certain supportive things in place to make sure that you are really at your most best so that you can have longevity. When I have parents come in as my patients and they say they have, children, and it's actually really amazing because I've seen historically through parents that have sent their children to see me, their teens to see me, their young adults to see me, that when I see patterns, are creatures of habit, right? So there's going to be patterns from genetics that passes down as part of a lineage. And so very often I see the mother and the daughter, or I see the mother and the son, because whatever the mother's patterns were bestowed upon that child. And when that child has similar illnesses, then there's the cause and effect. There's your karya karana, which is the cause and effect. And so sometimes when I put things as part of habits in place, they could be for the good or they could be for the not so good. And so Ayurveda encourages us to be more on the side of the scale where it's for the good, so that we can experience life in its fullest. So when I tell my parents that come to see me, you're teaching your children proper habits and proper healthy practices by being the model, because that's where it starts. We were modeling after our parents. And so whatever they were doing, whatever our environment was doing, is going to influence us. And so years later, a couple decades later, when we see the fruits of these actions from the past, that's how the past comes to the present moment. And, with Ayurveda, we can always work on changing the past by how we see the present moment. And in doing so, we affect the future in a different way. And so we want to make sure that if we want to stick around for a while, especially parents who have children that they love and want to be with for a long time, then it's up to the parents to be the center of their universe. And even people without parents, those of us that don't have children, I want to be around for a while. I want to enjoy my life fully. I don't want to fall apart along the way. And I don't. I haven't. And in fact, I'm almost 50 and I'm in amazing health, better than I was in my 20s, better than I was in my teens, better than I was when I was a child. And that's all because of yoga and Ayurveda being influenced in my life majorly. It is the foundation of my life. And there's been a consistency in my practices, especially with these teachings that have been around for thousands of years as a scientific body of wisdom. And so in implementing these things to be consistent with, what do I mean by consistency? Things that are really simplistic as part of the day. Waking up around the same time every day. Going to sleep around the same time every day. 7 days a week, as much as possible. Definitely on the side of the scale where the balance is more in favor of versus the opposite. Because, life happens sometimes and you are having like a great time with friends and it's not that often that you have the opportunity to stay up till like 11 or 11:30 or something like that, maybe midnight on that really crazy night. That's fine. That's part of life. And when you are in a healthy state, you can sustain that. That's not a big deal because the body can maintain that. It's not a big deal. And then it's what you do the day after to really just regain your sense of homeostasis, to keep the wellness going. Because at some point you get depleted. And the depletion is because of just doing things in excess, not doing things enough, and, just stress, really. And without having consistency, there's more stress. So having the meals consistently 2 to 3 times a day, as you're eating your meals 2 to 3 times a day, around the same time. So you're waking up around the same time, you're eating your meals around the same time, you're going to sleep around the same time, you're exercising around the same time. You create a certain level of consistency. And the body is a historical system and requires consistency for health. There's no way around it. We can justify it as much as possible. The reality, the fact is, your body will produce the results based on your investment. Your body will produce the results based on what your intentions are. Your body will produce the results based on what your efforts have been. And if you have inconsistencies in your life regularly, then you will have inconsistencies in your health. That's just, that's simple logic. And so in order to avoid much of that, it's important to create a regimented schedule most of the time that you adhere to as much as possible. And the fact is, the observational obvious fact is, your health is a byproduct of that. You can't avoid it. You can think about it in any which way. You can resist it. You can reject it, resent it. Any of these things that the mind wants to do because it likes to be unruly. The fact is, if you're feeling good and healthy and strong and you have a good abdominal cavity and it's not filled with visceral fat and you have good, steady, consistent energy and you're not waking up depleted and tired and agitated or fatigued or having issues with bowel movements and appetite issues, that you're not hungry or you're hungry all the time or inconsistently, like all these things, all these what Ayurveda calls lakshanas or characteristics or traits or tendencies are the facts. Your life is a fact. So what is the fact of your health? And if you want to consider what is the quality of your health, then you have to look at your life. Ayurveda says ahara and vihara, which is diet and lifestyle, are the primary causes, the nidana, of disease. We don't want to get sick, then don't do those things to get you sick. Genetics plays a role, of course it does, and karmic factors, if we want to include things like that. Environmental factors, outside factors, life circumstances, work circumstances. Of course, all that stuff gets factored in. And still, within the context of all that, we don't let life run us over. We don't have to. It's a choice, really. For the most part, there's always modifications that could be made as much as possible to get closer to that goal. For some people, it might not be 100% just because lifestyle is lifestyle, and what you're doing for work is what you're doing for work. Many of my clients that are, restaurant managers or owners or workers, or, patients that come to see me that are surgeons and nurses and doctors, if they're needing to do an overnighter because they're on call, then of course that's just part of their dharmic duty, like we talked about last week. And so in those circumstances, we can make modifications as much as possible, but they won't get to 100 just because if you're not going to sleep at the time that the sun starts to set a few hours later. And as we've talked about in the sleep modules, by 10 o'clock, not in bed by 10 o'clock, asleep around 10 o'clock. And whatever time you wake up, the swabhava, the natural tendency of whatever time you wake up in the morning, then you're already setting yourself up for failure. That's just the thing. And we can't expect, optimal if we're not properly investing. And so these are all choices we have to really sit with, take responsibility of. We can make choices, and we have to make these choices and then follow up with the actions, because that's the important thing. It's not enough to just say, oh, I want to be healthy. Well, it takes work to be healthy. That athlete that can run hundreds of miles or bike hundreds of miles or trek through terrain that's really turbulent and intense. You don't just go from sitting on a couch to, I'm going to go climb a mountain today. The amount of work and effort that's put into that level of success that becomes an acknowledgement, as an end result, takes time and work. You have to do it, and it's diligence. It's that discipline. It's the daily, consistent practice and adherence to that regimen as much as possible. So, with just the simplicity of it, adhering to going to sleep same time, early time, waking up early time, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, depending on what meals are important to you, and all these things based on your constitution, based on where you're at today. Getting your exercise in the morning, ideally, before breakfast. Like putting these things in place and letting work, life happen in between will be threaded through. And then you'll create a certain level of pattern and consistency that you don't have to think about it anymore. It just becomes second nature. You're like, oh, it's 9 o'clock. I'm kind of feeling a little sleepy. Oh, the sun is setting a little earlier for those of us that still deal with daylight savings time, which is kind of silly. But anyway, that's the reality. That's the fact, right? Can't oppose the fact. And whenever you question the fact, you look at what's reality, and you look at, well, how am I feeling with my energy? How are my hormones? How is my quality of sleep? And what's the quality of my mind? What's my appetite like? What's my energy like overall? How am I in society? How am I really interacting with people? Is there a certain level of, connection and sweetness, or am I feeling angry and hostile and aggressive and frustrated? And all, we look at all these qualities, and we come back to the source, which is here, and we question. This is the self-reflective process. Ayurveda causes us to really look at ourselves in our lives and take responsibility. It's not up to a doctor. It's not up to me as an Ayurvedic doctor. It's not up to your primary medical doctor or DO or functional medical doctor or naturopath to be in charge of your life. We can only make suggestions based on what we see from the outside and understand and empathize and sympathize, make suggestions, and then as I tell my patients, this is your homework. Once you leave here and I've given you these tools to consider, take a few of them, start implementing them into your life, and you will see the fact of what these truths are to be truth for you based on how you implement these within your own life context. You become the fact. You become this scientific knowledge. It's like when I have patients come in and they're under medical care from a primary physician, and they want to change certain circumstances of their health, and I say, great, let's see your labs. And then as we start working together, all of a sudden the labs start to change. And so there's the scientific knowledge. So you did something based on recommendations we came up with together, and then suddenly your lab work starts to change. And then the doctors in the Western field are like, wow, what are you doing? Because your glucose has come down, and your cholesterol has regulated itself, and your liver enzymes are functioning properly, and your skin is clearing up. What are you doing differently? And you would say, well, Dr. Antonio said, go to sleep at this time, wake up at this time, exercise at this time, eat at these times. This is the foods that I'm eating. This is how I'm really interacting in my life, and I'm feeling more happier and more content and more aligned, and I feel purpose. And then the doctor will say, that's amazing. That, this is how we work together, and all in service of you. And so my life is in service to others and supporting community and achieving a certain level of health and well-being, because I know it. I live it for myself, and it's great. As I see time and space continuing for me and ages pass, I'm amazing because of all of this. And, I have moments of being human too. I might get a cold, of course, because that's just part of life. These little things are part of life. Some of the bigger things can be avoided for the most part. So anyway, that's the tidbit for today. So the wrap up is be consistent with what you're doing. Make the effort. You are worth the investment, even if you don't think you are. Even if you have that thought in the back of your mind that's self-sabotaging and makes you feel like you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you don't like yourself, you're depressed, you're anxious, that's all good. I mean, that's all there. That's all what's real for you. So, of course. And you have to start somewhere. So you pick one or two things, one thing, five things, whatever you can do that you know you can commit to so that that level of success will be more consistent for you. Sometimes people take on too much at once. It's like overeating, and then you throw up all over the place, and then it doesn't work. So let's not binge and purge. Let's slowly chew, chew slowly, which is one of the recommendations in Ayurveda. We say chew slowly, so you can get the most out of whatever you're taking in. Slow down. Life can speed up around you, but when you actually slow down, you actually slow down. It actually is not going to be that overwhelming at that point. So that's the wrap up. And then when you're feeling good, you'll feel success. And then that sense of wealth and abundance and all that stuff will come secondarily, of course. I mean, that's just life. Life will give it to you when you're open and feeling like moving through things. Amazing. So stay tuned for next week's topic. And as always, feel free to private message me, and I'm always taking on new patients, and it's always great to work with each person and their adventure and their journeys and explore their health and wellness to get them to a really good place, because that makes me happy. And also just remember that I teach yoga classes on Zoom twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays from 8 to 9, which is a really integrated practice, and it's not too much to chew. And there's an upcoming cooking class next Saturday, November 7th from 10 to 1. All of this is Eastern time. And so register as soon as possible. There's a discount rate. And there's also just a discount currently because of COVID times for people who want to work with me. And so I look forward to hearing from you. Have an amazing Monday. It's a great start. And I'll talk to you guys soon.